The blinding flash of cameras can make a saint look like a sinner, and a sinner look like a king. For one man, tonight was his coronation. He stood on stage, a golden trophy in one hand, and his beautiful, much younger mistress in the other, bathed in the adoring light of the city's elite. He raised a champagne flute, his voice booming with triumph, ready to deliver the final, crushing blow to the memory of the woman he'd discarded. But he never saw her coming. He never imagined that the ghost of his past wouldn't just haunt him. She'd arrive on the arm of a billionaire, ready to burn his entire empire to the ground. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel was a universe of its own, a glittering cosmos of crystal chandeliers, champagne bubbles, and the carefully curated smiles of New York's most powerful figures. Tonight, the gravitational center of that universe was Marcus Thorne. He stood on the brightly lit stage, the Innovator of the Year award, a heavy shard of sculpted gold, cool and solid in his grip. At 50, he was the picture of success, a bespoke Tom Ford suit that cost more than most people's cars, a chiseled jawline maintained by discipline and a private chef, and an air of predatory confidence that both charmed and intimidated. His company, Thorne Innovations, had just secured the landmark Project Helios, a multi-billion-dollar urban renewal contract that had reshaped the city's skyline. This award was the cherry on top, the public anointing of his victory. But for Marcus, victory was never complete without a vanquished foe. And tonight, his target wasn't a corporate rival. He leaned into the microphone, his voice a smooth, deep baritone that commanded attention. Thank you to the board, to my incredible team. You are the architects of our success. He paused, letting the applause wash over him. His eyes scanned the room, a conqueror surveying his domain. Then his gaze softened as he turned to the woman standing beside him, a vision in crimson silk. Tiffany Hayes, all of 26, glowed under the stage lights. Her blonde hair was a cascade of perfect waves, her smile was a work of art, and her hand rested possessively on Marcus's arm. She was his living trophy, proof that he could have anything, and anyone, he wanted. But there is one person, Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone, who has been my true inspiration, a partner who understands that ambition requires sacrifice, that moving forward sometimes means leaving the past behind. His words were a carefully aimed volley, each one meant to find its mark, even if the intended target wasn't in the room. He knew the city's gossip columns would be, and they were a far more effective delivery system. He raised his champagne flute. To Tiffany, he declared, his voice ringing with false sincerity. My muse, my future. You came into my life like a breath of fresh air after a long, suffocating storm. You showed me what true support, what unwavering belief looks like. Thank you for helping me build this dream. The room erupted in applause. Tiffany blushed, leaning in to kiss him for the cameras that flashed like a man-made lightning storm. The toast was perfect. It was a public declaration of his new life and a thinly veiled insult to the old one. He celebrated his mistress and, in the same breath, painted his ex-wife, Elena, as the suffocating storm he had so valiantly escaped. He imagined her reading about it tomorrow, sitting alone in the quiet, modest life she had been relegated to after their divorce 2 years ago. The thought filled him with a cold, satisfying sense of power. He had won. He had erased her and rewritten history with a younger, more beautiful co-star. The story of Marcus Thorne would not include a chapter on the quiet, intelligent woman who had helped him build his company from a garage startup into a corporate behemoth. No, that part of the manuscript had been burned. From his elevated position on stage, The world seemed perfect, arranged exactly as he'd designed it. The faces in the crowd were a blur of admiration and envy. The future was a straight ascending line, paved with more money and more power. He clinked his glass against Tiffany's, the crystal chime a perfect note in the symphony of his success. He was invincible. He was a king, and kings, he believed, were never called to account for the bridges they burned to build their thrones. 2 years, 24 months, 730 days. For Elena Vance, that was the amount of time it took to crawl out of the wreckage of her life. The divorce had been more than a legal separation. It had been an amputation. Marcus had surgically removed her from his life with a cold, brutal efficiency that left her gasping. She remembered the day it all shattered. It wasn't a dramatic fight. It was quiet, which was somehow worse. He had come home to their sprawling Upper East Side apartment, the one she had meticulously designed, and set his briefcase down with a soft, final click. He didn't look at her. He looked at a spot on the wall just past her shoulder. "I don't love you anymore, Elena," he had said, the words as sterile as a surgeon's scalpel. "I've met someone. Her name is Tiffany. I'm filing for divorce." Just like that. A 16-year marriage, a partnership that had weathered financial storms, sleepless nights building a business plan on their small kitchen table, and the sacrifice of her own career in architecture to support his vision. All of it was dismissed in 3 sentences. The someone was his new assistant, a girl barely out of college, a cliché so painful it felt like a joke. The legal battle was a humiliation. Marcus, with his team of ruthless lawyers, painted her as a complacent housewife clinging to a lifestyle she hadn't earned. They argued that her contributions were non-financial and therefore of lesser value. They dissected her life, her spending, her very worth. She had been the strategic mind behind so many of his early successes, the one who saw the angles he missed, the one who calmed nervous investors, the one who edited his speeches until they shone. But none of it was on paper. It was just the invisible, unbillable work of a wife. She ended up with a settlement that was generous by any normal standard, but insulting given the billion-dollar empire she had helped create. More than the money, he took her dignity. He made her feel like a relic, a discarded piece of his past he was now paying to store out of sight. The first 6 months were a blur of grief. She moved into a quiet, elegant but much smaller apartment overlooking the Hudson River. Some days she couldn't get out of bed. The society pages were a minefield, filled with pictures of Marcus and Tiffany at galas, on yachts, living the life that was supposed to have been hers. His toast tonight was just the latest, most public stab in a death by 1,000 cuts. She knew about the award ceremony. It was impossible to avoid, and she knew he would use it as a stage. Marcus was never one to miss an opportunity for public theatre. But somewhere in that fog of pain, a spark of the old Eleanor, the sharp, brilliant woman she had been before Marcus, began to smoulder. It started with anger, a cold, clear, diamond-hard fury. He had not just left her, he had tried to erase her. He had called her a suffocating storm. He had no idea what a real storm looked like. She stopped grieving and started plotting, not a petty revenge, but a resurrection. She pulled out her old architectural drafts, her business journals, her notes on market trends she'd followed out of habit. The mind that had helped build Thorne Innovations was still there, dormant but undamaged. If anything, it was sharper now, honed by pain and fueled by a singular burning purpose, to build something for herself, something he could not touch, claim, or diminish. She started small, consulting for a boutique urban design firm. Her insights were revolutionary. She had a unique ability to see not just buildings, but the ecosystems they created, the flow of people, of capital, of life. Her reputation grew quietly, but quickly within niche, powerful circles. She wasn't on the society pages anymore. She was in encrypted emails and boardrooms where real power was brokered. She had reconnected with old contacts, people who remembered her from before she became Mrs. Thorne, people who respected her intellect. And one of those contacts had led to a meeting that had changed everything. A meeting with a man who didn't just see her potential, he saw her as the weapon he had been looking for. A man who was about to walk into the St. Regis Ballroom and change the gravitational center of Marcus Thorne's perfect universe. Elena wasn't watching from home tonight. She was done watching from the sidelines. She was about to make her entrance. While Marcus and Tiffany were posing for another round of photos on stage, a subtle shift occurred at the grand entrance of the ballroom. It wasn't loud or ostentatious. It was a ripple of silence that spread through the chatter, a collective turning of heads, an almost imperceptible intake of breath from those closest to the door. The security detail, usually stoic and impassive, had stiffened, their professionalism sharpened to a razor's edge. Two of them flanked the ornate double doors, holding them open for a new arrival. First came the man. He was tall, with a lean, athletic build that his impeccably tailored charcoal suit did little to conceal. His hair was the color of dark silver, cut short and neat, but it was his face that commanded attention. It was a face of harsh, intelligent angles, dominated by intense, slate-gray eyes that seemed to absorb the light around them. He moved with an economy of motion, a quiet confidence that was more intimidating than any boast. This was not a man who needed to announce his presence. His presence announced itself. The whispers started instantly, spreading through the room like wildfire. "Is that? It can't be." Julian Croft. The name itself held a kind of power. Julian Croft was less a man and more a myth in the world of business. The CEO of Croft Enterprises, he was a recluse who rarely attended public events. His company was a global leviathan, with interests in technology, sustainable energy, and international logistics, a silent giant that dwarfed even Thorne innovations. He was known for his ruthless efficiency and a strategic mind that operated on a level most people couldn't comprehend. To see him here, at an event celebrating his rival's achievement, was unthinkable. But the shock of his appearance was immediately eclipsed by the woman on his arm. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that clung to her figure, a stark, elegant contrast to Tiffany's garish crimson. The dress was a masterpiece of understated design, with a daringly low back that revealed smooth, pale skin. A single piece of jewelry adorned her, a necklace of cascading diamonds that glittered like captured starlight against her throat. Her dark hair, once worn in a simple, practical style, was now swept up in a complex, graceful chignon, revealing the elegant line of her neck and jaw. Her face was the same, yet entirely different. The soft, accommodating lines had been replaced by a serene, unshakable confidence. Her makeup was subtle but flawless, emphasizing eyes that were no longer apologetic, but clear, direct, and unnervingly calm. She met the stares of the astonished crowd, not with defiance, but with a cool indifference that was far more powerful. It was Elena Vance. But it wasn't the Elena anyone remembered. This was not the discarded wife, the sad footnote in the story of Marcus Thorne. This was a woman reborn, sculpted from the ashes of her past into something new, something formidable. She moved with a liquid grace, her hand resting lightly on Julian Croft's arm, not for support, but as an equal. They were a portrait of power, a matched set. The room, which had been buzzing with Marcus's triumph, was now crackling with a new, frantic energy. The gossip shifted in a heartbeat. Who was she with? How did she know Julian Croft? And what, in God's name, was she doing here? The photographers, sensing the shift in the room's gravity, began to pivot their lenses away from the stage, turning them towards this new, infinitely more interesting spectacle. The coronation of Marcus Thorne had just been interrupted. On stage, Marcus was still smiling, his arm wrapped around Tiffany's waist, but the smile had become a rigid, frozen thing. The sound in the ballroom had changed. The warm applause had been replaced by a sharp, insistent murmur, and the sea of faces that had been turned towards him was now looking past him, towards the entrance. He followed their gaze, annoyed at the interruption. His eyes scanned the crowd, and then he saw them. He saw Julian Croft, his greatest and most enigmatic competitor. For a moment, confusion was his dominant emotion. What was Croft doing here? It was a breach of etiquette, a hostile move to show up at a rival's celebration, and then he saw the woman on Croft's arm. The world didn't slow down. It stopped. The flashing cameras, the clinking glasses, the hum of 100 conversations, it all vanished, replaced by a roaring silence in his ears. His breath caught in his chest. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Elena. It was her, but it wasn't. The shape was the same, but the substance had been fundamentally altered. The quiet, gentle woman he had left behind had been replaced by this creature of impossible poise and icy beauty. The simple gold band she used to wear was gone, replaced by the fire of Croft's diamonds. The comfortable cardigans he remembered were gone, replaced by the severe elegance of Parisian silk. He felt Tiffany tense beside him. "Marcus? Who is that?" she whispered, her voice laced with a sudden, sharp insecurity. She had seen the look on his face. She had seen where every eye in the room was now fixed. Marcus couldn't answer. His mind was struggling to process the contradictory information. Eleanor here? With Julian Croft? It was a category error, a glitch in the matrix of the world he had so carefully constructed. Eleanor belonged to the past, to a quiet life of obscurity he had generously funded. She did not belong here, in the heart of his triumph, looking like she owned the place. And she certainly did not belong on the arm of the one man on earth who could threaten him. A wave of cold dread, an emotion he hadn't felt in years, washed over him. This wasn't a coincidence. Her presence, Croft's presence. It was a message. Elena and Julian didn't look towards the stage. They moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace into the heart of the ballroom. A path seemed to clear for them organically. People stepped back, their curiosity mixed with a palpable sense of awe and fear. Julian nodded curtly at a few industry titans who dared to catch his eye, but his focus was on Eleanor, guiding her through the throng. Eleanor's gaze was fixed forward. She didn't scan the room for him. She didn't seem to care that he was there at all. Her indifference was more painful than any glare, any accusation. It was as if he had been reduced to a piece of the furniture, an irrelevant part of the scenery of her new life. Marcus felt a primal urge to reassert his dominance. He was the man being honored. This was his night. He stepped off the small stage, muttering a clipped, "Excuse me," to Tiffany, and started to move towards them. His mind raced, searching for a script. Should he be magnanimous? Congratulate her on... what? Moving on? Should he be aggressive? Accuse Croft of some corporate espionage? He managed to get within 10 feet of them, just as they were greeted by Lawrence Sterling, the elderly and immensely respected chairman of Sterling Bank. "Julian, I didn't expect to see you here," Sterling boomed, his eyes twinkling with interest. "Lawrence," Julian replied, his voice a low, calm rumble. I wouldn't miss it. I'm here to support my firm's most valuable asset." He gestured slightly towards Elena. Sterling's gaze fell upon her, his bushy eyebrows rising in surprise and then dawning recognition. "My goodness, Elena Vance, I haven't seen you in years. Not since... well..." He trailed off, tactfully avoiding the mention of Marcus. "You look absolutely remarkable, my dear." "Thank you, Lawrence." Elena's voice was smooth as velvet, but with an undercurrent of steel Marcus had never heard before. "It's good to be back. Her most valuable asset." The words echoed in Marcus's head, each one a hammer blow against the fragile structure of his ego. He was frozen, 10 feet away, a king dethroned in his own court, watching his past and his future collide in a spectacle of his own public humiliation. He had wanted to erase her, but she had returned, and it was clear she was the one holding the eraser now. The conversation between Elena, Julian, and Lawrence Sterling created a small, impenetrable circle of power. Anyone who approached hesitated, feeling the invisible barrier of significance that surrounded them. Marcus stood on the periphery, an outsider at his own party, the Innovator of the Year award in his hand, now feeling like a cheap, hollow prop. Tiffany finally caught up to him, her fingers digging into his arm. "Marcus, what is going on? Why is your ex-wife with Julian Croft? Are you going to say something?" Her voice was a high-pitched whisper, laced with panic. The night that was supposed to be her grand debut as the official partner of Marcus Thorne was unraveling. She was being upstaged by a ghost. "Not now, Tiffany," Marcus hissed, his eyes locked on Elena. He was trying to solve an impossible equation. Elena had been an art history major who became an architect. She was smart, yes, but her expertise was in aesthetics and classical design, not the cutthroat world of corporate strategy. How could she possibly be Julian Croft's most valuable asset? The answer came from Lawrence Sterling, whose voice was loud enough for those nearby to hear clearly. "Most valuable asset, you say, Julian? I thought your new AI division was your crown jewel, the Athena project?" Julian Croft allowed a rare, thin smile to grace his lips. "Athena is indeed revolutionary," he said, his gaze shifting to Elena with undisguised admiration. "But a weapon is only as good as the person who wields it. Elena is the chief strategist behind Athena's market implementation. In fact, she's the architect of the entire initiative." A collective, quiet gasp rippled through the onlookers who were close enough to hear. The Athena project was the most talked about, most secretive development in the tech and finance world. It was a predictive analytics AI, rumored to be decades ahead of its time, capable of forecasting market shifts, identifying corporate weaknesses, and planning strategic takeovers with terrifying accuracy. Companies, including Thorne Innovations, had spent billions trying to develop something similar, with little success. To be the head of that project was to be one of the most powerful corporate figures in the world. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Elena, chief strategist, architect. The words were familiar, but the context was alien. She had been the architect of their home, the strategist of their early business pitches. He had taken her skills for granted, viewing them as domestic, supportive, secondary to his own vision. He had never imagined she could apply them on this scale, in this arena. He had not just underestimated her, he had been utterly blind to her true capabilities. It was then that Elena finally turned her head, and her eyes met his. There was no anger in her gaze, no pain, no hint of the woman who had wept when he left her. There was only a calm, dispassionate assessment, the look a scientist might give a specimen under a microscope. It was a look that told him she saw every one of his flaws, his vanities, his weaknesses, and that none of them affected her anymore. In that single glance, she stripped him of all his power over her. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, an acknowledgement that was worse than an insult. It was a dismissal. Then she turned back to her conversation. The pieces began to click into place with sickening clarity. Her background in architecture wasn't about buildings. It was about systems, structures, and finding the load-bearing walls. Her quiet, observant nature wasn't passivity. It was data collection. All those years she had sat in on his meetings, read his reports, and helped him prepare for negotiations. She hadn't just been a supportive wife. She had been learning. She had learned his business, his methods, his mindset, inside and out. She knew how he thought, how he operated. She knew his playbook by heart. And Julian Croft had given her an entire new arsenal to use with that knowledge. This wasn't just revenge. This was a strategic demolition, planned with the precision of an architect and the cold logic of a master strategist. The gala wasn't a random venue. It was chosen. Her appearance on this night, at the peak of his hubris, was the first move in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The toast he had made to Tiffany, the one meant to be his final, public humiliation of Elena, had instead become the prologue to his own downfall. The atmosphere in the ballroom had transformed. The celebratory mood had evaporated, replaced by a tense, electric curiosity. The epicenter of all attention was no longer the stage where Marcus had received his award, but the elegant, formidable duo of Julian Croft and Elena Vance. They didn't have to seek out the powerful. The powerful came to them. CEOs, investors, and political figures who had earlier been slapping Marcus on the back were now forming a patient, reverent queue to get a word with Croft and his mysterious new strategist. Marcus stood abandoned, a king without a court. The award in his hand felt heavier with every passing second, a monument to a victory that already felt like ancient history. Tiffany was clinging to him, her earlier confidence shattered. "Do something, Marcus," she urged, her voice trembling slightly. "This is humiliating. She's making a fool of you." But what could he do? To storm over and cause a scene would make him look weak and pathetic. To ignore them was impossible. They were the sun, and every other planet in the room was being pulled into their orbit. He was adrift in the cold, empty space they had created around him. His investors were starting to look nervous. He saw Barry Gold, a major shareholder in Thorne Innovations, talking animatedly with a rival developer, both of them occasionally glancing over at Marcus with expressions of profound concern. He saw his own COO, a man he trusted implicitly, looking pale and shaken. The entire power structure of his professional life was being destabilized before his very eyes. Project Helios, the contract that had won him the award, was a massive, complex undertaking. It required the continued confidence of the market, the banks, and the city. A rival like Julian Croft making a significant move, especially with an unknown weapon like the Athena project, could spook investors and cause the whole delicate financial structure to collapse. Finally, driven by a desperate need to reclaim some control, he found his moment. Julian Croft was pulled into a conversation with a senator, leaving Elena momentarily alone as she gracefully accepted a glass of water from a passing waiter. This was his chance. He walked over, his steps feeling both too loud and too slow. He tried to compose his features into a mask of casual authority. "Elena," he said, forcing a congenial tone. "What a surprise. You look well." She turned to face him, her expression placid. "Marcus." She didn't smile. She didn't offer any pleasantries. She just said his name, the single word hanging in the air between them like a judgment. "I have to say I'm impressed," he continued, gesturing vaguely around the room. "This is quite the comeback." Julian Croft. No one gets close to him. He was trying to sound like a worldly equal, but the words came out sounding hollow and needy. He's a man who values talent over ego, she replied, her voice cool and even. It was a clear, calculated jab. He flinched internally but pressed on. Look, Elena, about what I said on stage. The toast. It was just for the crowd. You know how these things are. It was a weak, pathetic lie, and they both knew it. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed her face. A faint, pitying amusement. Do you know what I learned after you left, Marcus? I learned that for 16 years, I had been living in a supporting role in a story you were writing about yourself. I was just a character, and when you got tired of that character, you wrote her out of the script. She took a small, deliberate sip of her water. So I decided to start writing my own story. And in my story, you're not the hero. You're not even the villain. You're just the inciting incident. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of her words stole the air from his lungs. Inciting incident. He, Marcus Thorne, Innovator of the Year, a titan of industry, had been reduced to a plot point in her narrative. Whatever game you're playing, he snarled, his composure finally cracking. It won't work. Project Helios is sealed. My position is unassailable. Elena looked at him, and for a fleeting second, he saw the woman he'd married, the quiet intensity in her eyes, the formidable intellect working behind them. Your mistake, Marcus, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, is that you always announce your victory before the game is over. You build beautiful, towering structures on foundations of sand because you never bother to check the geology. You think Helios is a skyscraper, but I know for a fact it's a house of cards, and a storm is coming. Just then, Julian Croft returned to her side, placing a proprietorial hand on the small of her back. He glanced at Marcus, his grey eyes devoid of any emotion. It was a look of utter dismissal. Are we ready, Elena? Julian asked, his voice directed only to her. Yes, she replied, turning her back on Marcus without another word. I believe we are. They began to walk towards the stage, the crowd parting before them once more. A technician hurried to the microphone, and the ballroom fell into a sudden, expectant hush. Marcus stood frozen in their wake, the chill of her final words creeping into his bones. A storm is coming. He finally understood. She hadn't come here to witness his triumph. She had come here to announce his execution. The president of the awards committee, a flustered-looking man named Mr. Abernathy, hurried to the stage. He looked confusedly from Marcus, who was still standing, paralyzed in the middle of the floor, to Julian Croft, who was now standing near the lectern, as if he owned it. Mr. Croft, Abernathy began, his voice amplified by the microphone. This is an unexpected honor. Do you wish to say a few words? It was a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of protocol. Julian didn't move to the lectern. He simply inclined his head towards Elena. I believe my colleague, Miss Vance, has an announcement to make. All eyes in the room, a constellation of New York's wealthiest and most influential, were now fixed on Elena. She walked to the microphone with the unhurried grace of a queen. She adjusted it slightly, the small sound echoing in the silent room. She didn't seem nervous. She seemed inevitable. Good evening, she began, her voice calm and clear, carrying to every corner of the ballroom. I'd like to congratulate Marcus Thorne on his award tonight. Innovation is a laudable goal, and Project Helios is certainly an ambitious undertaking. There was a polite, if somewhat hesitant, spattering of applause. Marcus watched, his heart pounding a frantic, discordant rhythm. This was it. The blade was about to fall. Ambition, however, Elena continued, her voice hardening almost imperceptibly, must be built on a foundation of reality, on due diligence, on understanding the landscape, not just as it is, but as it will be. She paused, letting the words sink in. Thorne Innovations secured the Helios contract based on a projected cost analysis and a series of zoning variances granted by the City Planning Commission. It is the bedrock of their entire financial model for the next decade. She looked out at the audience, her gaze sweeping over the faces of bankers, investors, and city officials. As of 6 o'clock tonight, that bedrock has turned to quicksand. A shocked murmur erupted in the room. In Croft Enterprises, under my strategic guidance, Elena announced, has just completed the acquisition of a controlling interest in 3 key entities: Omni Logistics, a materials supplier that holds the exclusive regional contracts for the specialized steel required for Project Helios; North Star Surveyors, the only firm with the geological data proving that the primary construction site is significantly less stable than Thorne's initial report suggested; and most importantly, the entire commercial debt portfolio of the Clarion Group, the primary subcontractor for the project's first phase. The room was utterly silent now. The financial implications of what she was saying were cascading through the minds of everyone present. It was a 3-pronged attack of devastating genius. She had seized control of the supply chain, the geological viability, and the project's primary contractor. What this means, Elena stated, her voice as sharp and precise as a diamond cutter, is that the projected costs for Project Helios have just increased by an estimated 40%. The construction timeline, due to the newly revealed geological challenges that will require significant foundational reinforcement, will be extended by a minimum of 2 years. And the Clarion Group, under our debt management, will be invoking a contractual clause to renegotiate their terms. She looked directly at Marcus now, her eyes locking onto his across the sea of stunned faces. In short, Project Helios, as it was approved and financed, is no longer viable. It is a financial black hole. And any investor, bank, or city official who continues to back it is throwing their money into a fire. Checkmate. It wasn't just a business move, it was a public execution. She hadn't just undermined his project. She had used his own methods against him. Marcus was famous for aggressive acquisitions and leveraging debt to control his rivals. She had taken his playbook, refined it, and used it to gut him from the inside out, using her intimate knowledge of his suppliers and contractors, knowledge she had gained over years of being by his side. A final, devastating twist was delivered not by Elena, but by Julian Croft, who stepped forward as she stepped back. To that end, Croft said, his voice a low growl of finality, Croft Enterprises is formally announcing our own urban development initiative tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., Project Artemis. It is a fully funded, technologically superior, and ecologically sustainable alternative, designed and overseen by Ms. Vance. We have already secured preliminary approval from key members of the Planning Commission who have been briefed on the structural issues with the Helios site. We invite anyone looking for a stable, profitable, and truly innovative investment to join us. The game was over. She hadn't just destroyed his project, she had replaced it with her own. She hadn't just reclaimed her name, she had made it the most powerful one in the room. Marcus Thorne stood alone, the Golden Award for Innovator of the Year, a pathetic irony in his hand. He was the innovator who hadn't seen the future coming. He was the king who had been toppled not by an army, but by the quiet, brilliant queen he had cast aside. The silence that followed Julian Croft's words was not empty. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and warmth from the grand ballroom. For a single, suspended moment, no one moved. Then, the vacuum was filled by a sonic boom of frantic, hushed activity. The sound was not of applause, but of the rustling of fabric as people turned to their neighbors, the frantic tapping of thumbs on glowing screens, the sharp, urgent whispers of brokers and investors speaking into their phones. The festive atmosphere of the gala had curdled into that of a stock market trading floor at the moment of a crash. Marcus stood rooted to the spot, a statue in the middle of a stampede. The golden trophy for Innovator of the Year felt like a lead weight in his hand, a cruel, mocking effigy of a victory that had lasted mere minutes. His vision tunneled, the glittering room blurring at the edges until the only thing in sharp focus was Elena. She was turning away from the microphone, the picture of serene composure, as Julian Croft placed a steadying, proprietary hand on the small of her back. "Marcus, we have to go. Now," Tiffany hissed, her fingers digging into his arm like talons. Her face, which had been a mask of adoration, was now pale with panic and fury. This was not the future she had signed up for. "We're not going anywhere," Marcus snarled, his voice a ragged whisper. To flee would be to admit defeat. "Don't be an idiot," she shot back, her voice stripped of all its former sweetness. "Look around you. It's over. He's ruined." She didn't say, "You're ruined." She said, "He's ruined," already creating a third-person distance between them. She pulled her arm from his grasp. "I'm not going down with you." With a final contemptuous glance, she turned and melted into the chaotic crowd, a predator seeking safer, more prosperous hunting grounds. His abandonment was a small, personal tremor before the main earthquake. Barry Gold, a man who had clapped him on the back an hour ago and praised his genius, now looked straight through him, his face a grim mask as he spoke urgently into his phone, no doubt giving a sell order. Lawrence Sterling, the elder statesman of New York finance, walked directly past Marcus, offering not even a glance of pity, and extended a hand to Elena. "A truly masterful play, Miss Vance," Sterling declared, his voice booming with genuine admiration. "A new era for the city. You have my full support." Each word was a nail in Marcus's coffin. He watched as his allies, his investors, the city's power brokers, all gravitated towards Elena and Julian, their new son. He was left in a cold, dark orbit, an irrelevant planetoid cast out of the system. He finally looked at Elena as she prepared to leave. She paused at the grand archway of the ballroom and looked back, her eyes finding his across the wreckage of his empire. There was no triumph in her expression, no malice, no glee. There was only the profound and final punctuation mark at the end of a long, painful sentence. It was a look that said, "We are done now." Then she turned and walked out of the ballroom, out of his life, and into her future. The days that followed were a systematic, brutal dismantling of his entire existence. The headline on the front page of the Wall Street Journal the next morning read, "Thorne's Helios project collapses. Croft and Vance unveil Artemis takeover." His company's stock didn't just plummet, it nosedived into oblivion. He called an emergency board meeting, but the faces on the video call were a gallery of cold, accusing stares. They invoked an emergency clause in his contract, suspending his executive powers pending an investigation into gross fiscal mismanagement. He was locked out of the very empire he had built. He was a pariah. His phone, once a constant source of calls and messages, fell silent. The invitations stopped. The few people who did call were lawyers, serving him with lawsuits from shareholders who accused him of misleading them about the viability of the Helios project. He had built his world on a foundation of dominance and fear, and without those, he had nothing. No loyalty. No friends. Meanwhile, Project Artemis became a global phenomenon. Elena was not just the face of the project, she was its soul. She appeared on the cover of Forbes, not in a silk gown, but in a crisp blazer on a construction site, blueprints in hand. The article wasn't about her divorce or her comeback. It was about her revolutionary vision for human-centric urban ecosystems. She spoke of architecture not as a collection of buildings, but as a language that could foster community, sustainability, and well-being. Her partnership with Julian Croft was a thing of legend. They were a perfect synthesis of vision and execution. He managed the vast, complex logistics and finances, clearing the path for her to create. He never stood in front of her in interviews, but always slightly to her side, a silent, powerful testament to his belief in her genius. One evening, months later, Elena stood with Julian on the balcony of his penthouse, which had now become their shared home, looking out over the city skyline. Construction had already begun on the first phase of Artemis, and the lights of the cranes were like new constellations being born in the night sky. "Do you ever feel a sense of victory?" Julian asked, his voice a quiet rumble beside her. "When you think of that night?" Elena thought for a moment, watching the city breathe below. "I don't think of it as a victory over Marcus," she said softly. "That would be too small a definition. He was a symptom of a sickness, the belief that building something requires tearing someone else down. That night wasn't about destroying his house of cards. It was about showing the world how to build with stone on a solid foundation." She turned to him, her eyes clear and bright in the city light. "I'm not the person I was. Grief was my crucible, and it forged me into something new. I'm not just happy, Julian. I'm building, and for the first time in my life, I feel truly, unshakably free." She had written her own story, and it was not a tragedy of a wife scorned. It was the epic of a queen who had designed and built her own magnificent throne. 6 months after the St. Regis Gala, the name Marcus Thorne had become a cautionary tale whispered in the boardrooms and exclusive clubs where he was once lionized. His downfall was as swift as it was total. To pull a Thorne became shorthand for a catastrophic error in judgment born from pure hubris. Stripped of his company by a board of directors executing a hostile takeover and hounded by lawsuits, he was a ghost haunting the city he once sought to conquer. He now operated from a small, rented office in a nondescript building in Queens, a universe away from the gleaming towers of Manhattan. The bespoke suits were replaced by off-the-rack department store versions that hung awkwardly on his diminished frame. He spent his days making desperate calls to former contacts who suddenly never had time to talk, trying to piece together some semblance of a new venture from the scraps of his old reputation. But his name was toxic, his magic gone. The aura of invincibility had been an illusion, and Elena had shattered the mirror. One afternoon, he saw Tiffany. She was walking out of a high-end restaurant, laughing on the arm of a much older, less charismatic real estate developer. Their eyes met for a fleeting second across the street. There was no recognition in hers, no pity, just a cold, blank slate before she turned back to her new benefactor. She had jumped from his sinking ship with practiced ease, but her currency had been devalued. She was no longer the exciting muse of the Innovator of the Year. She was the beautiful but tainted accessory of a spectacular failure, a story people already knew the ending to. For Elena, life had moved in the opposite direction. The launch of Project Artemis was a resounding success. It was more than just a development. It was a paradigm shift in urban planning, integrating sustainable technology with community-focused design in a way no one had ever attempted. Her vision, once confined to the blueprints of a single home, was now reshaping a city. She and Julian Croft were the new center of gravity in the world of finance and innovation. Their partnership was seamless, a fusion of his immense resources and strategic reach with her visionary intellect. They were at a charity auction at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, an event where Marcus would have once held court. Now, it was Elena and Julian who commanded the room's quiet respect. They didn't need to be loud. Their power was a settled, confident fact. "They're calling you the architect," Julian said quietly, handing her a glass of champagne as they stood before a Monet. "Not just of buildings, but of the entire market." Elena smiled, a genuine, relaxed expression that reached her eyes. "And they call you the only man brave enough to work with her." He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "Bravery has nothing to do with it. It's simply recognizing a masterpiece when I see one." His gaze was not on the painting, but on her. Later that evening, as she was leaving the powder room, she saw him. Marcus was standing near a service exit, clearly not a guest, but waiting for someone, a portfolio clutched in his hand like a lifeline. He looked older, tired, the sharp edges of his confidence worn down to a dull ache. He saw her and froze, a deer caught in the headlights of a life he no longer possessed. "Elena," he stammered, taking a hesitant step forward. She stopped, her expression calm. There was no anger left, no pain. There was nothing but a quiet, clinical distance. I wanted to say I'm sorry," he mumbled, the word sounding foreign and clumsy on his tongue. "For everything. I was a fool. I didn't see you. I never really saw you." "No, you didn't," she agreed, her voice gentle but firm. There was no condemnation in it, only the simple statement of a fact. "You saw a reflection of yourself, and when it stopped flattering you, you broke the mirror." He flinched, the truth of her words a physical blow. "Can you ever forgive me?" he asked, his voice desperate. Elena looked at him, at the man who had been the center of her world for 16 years, the man who had caused her unimaginable pain and felt only a profound sense of detachment. He was a chapter in a book she had finished long ago. "I don't think about you enough to hold a grudge, Marcus," she said, and it was the kindest, most honest, and most devastating thing she could have said. Holding on to anger is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I chose to find the antidote instead. I chose to build. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the shadows of a world he no longer belonged to. She rejoined Julian in the grand hall, the light catching the diamonds at her throat. He took her arm, and together they walked back into the heart of the celebration, two architects of their own destiny, ready to build the future. Elena wasn't just free of Marcus, she was free of the past, and the skyline glittering before her was a blank page, waiting for her to write the next chapter. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but for one woman, it was a masterpiece served in the glittering heart of her ex-husband's triumph. This wasn't just a story about getting even. It was a story about getting whole. It's a powerful reminder that the people we discard and underestimate often possess a strength we can't even fathom. Elena didn't just rise from the ashes of her broken marriage. She used them to build an empire and, more importantly, to rebuild herself. Her story shows us that true power isn't about public trophies and humiliating others. It's the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from knowing your own worth, even when others try to strip it away. What did you think of Elena's ultimate checkmate? Was it justice, or was it genius? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love stories of epic comebacks and sweet, sweet karma, make sure to hit that like button Share this video with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable tales. Click the notification bell so you never miss a single moment of the drama.